from Russia with love. Another objective of the West that has not been achieved is this isolation of Russia, since many trading partners, especially China, major Latin American countries such as Brazil and Mexico, African states, and the BRICS in general. BRICS stands for Brazil, Russia, India, China, South Africa, in general did not join the sanctions. Therefore, the sanctions boomeranged, in the sense that while Europe was cut off from urgently needed resources, Russia was able to gradually compensate for many losses. And what's more, the process of fundamentally changing Russia's economic model that began in 2014 has accelerated over the past 2 years, with the country's growth rate in 2023 at 3.6% GDP, with unemployment at just 2%, and with per capita income in terms of purchasing power at $27,800. The analysis? Briefly, the goals of the sanctions against Russia were A, to cut off Russian exports so that the country would be deprived of economic resources and unable to wage war. B, to cut off its access to critical military technologies. And C, bringing pressure from the citizens and the oligarchy to the Russian government with the goal of regime change. In this regard, proponents of economic sanctions against Russia, such as Yale's professor Mr. Jay Sonnenfeld, were and are convinced that they have already caused serious damage to the country, believing that in the long run it would greatly reduce Russian economy, so its ability to wage war would be destroyed. On the contrary, though, the American economist Jay Galbraith, like us from the beginning, stated that nothing better could happen to the country than the sanctions in terms of its economic development. It's true, of course, that there has actually been a decline in Russian exports of oil and natural gas to Western countries, as well as other raw materials, especially minerals. However, Russia was compensated for its lower gas and oil exports with the help of their rising prices, while its export became subsequently increased significantly. Evolution of the current account balance of Russia in terms of its GDP. On the other hand, Russia imports fell due to restrictions, especially on consumer goods. Therefore, Russia's current account surplus did not decrease but increased, which means that the sanctions achieved the opposite of what they intended, increasing Russia's foreign exchange reserves. And besides, there is much to suggest that Russia's war was financed almost entirely with its own resources, so Russia's access to euros or dollars, as well as its frozen foreign exchange reserves of $300 billion, was and is irrelevant to the conduct of the war. And whether to what extent the Russian defense industry depended on Western imports of important manufacturing components, such as equipment, machinery, and especially semiconductors, remains unclear, while it is likely that Russia had long before the war stockpiled the technology it needed, predicting what would happen. Turning now to the political sphere, Russian manufacturing initially suffered significantly from the sanctions, as production indicators for many goods fell considerably in 2022, but the country's productive capacities, hence factories, workers, and technology, remain to exist, while to some extent with China's support, it was possible relatively quickly to convert Japanese or European production lines using Chinese designs into Russian ones. This is how the restart of the work was achieved, while soon it seems that the country will return to the old level of production. So in the final analysis, the sanctions have been a golden opportunity to diversify the economy itself, resulting in the last 8 years, and especially in 2023, large sectors of durable goods like cars, washing machines, etc., as well as the production of consumer goods, cereals, cheeses, fruits, etc., imported into Russia from Europe or from Turkey to return back to the country. In other words, it should not need imports and should produce them itself. Continuing with capital assets, much of it also passed from Western hands to Russian, noting that the Russian economy by 2022, from the automotive industry and aviation to fast food restaurants and large department stores, was still dominated by largely by Western companies. These Western companies then had to sell their fixed assets, factories or stores to Russian companies, which financed the acquisitions with cheap loans by Russian standards. The results here has been the creation of a more dynamic economy with its own raw material base, something that is not the case for many Western nations. So while the Germans, for example, paid twice as much for energy than they did before the Ukraine war, which is a competitive disadvantage vis-à-vis the US in particular, the Russians do not pay more. If not, they pay less. So from this point of view too, the sanctions turned out to be a gift for the Russian economy, contrary to the expectations of the West. In any case, all of this would hardly have been possible without the war, since before 2022, as Galbraith rightly said, the Russian government was neither willing nor able to force Western corporations out of the country or the oligarchs to choose between Russia and the West. These decisions were only made inevitable by subsequent political events, which in turn means that the sanctions strengthened Putin's position and did not weaken it as he believed the West would achieve. It's quite rightly stated that from the beginning, the sanctions against Russia had no prospects for the desired success, and that is, they were from birth doomed to fail. In particular, unlike an island country like Cuba or a purely extractive economy like Venezuela, Russia covers 1/6 of the whole planet, while it only has 145 million people. It has 20% to 30% of the whole world's resources, as well as a high level of expertise in science, technology, and engineering. And after the chaos of the 1990s, where the shock and awe policy was imposed on it by the West, a somewhat more effective relationship has developed between the state and the parastatal sector. Large companies such as Gazprom and the private sector, a fact that made it possible to prepare for the sanctions. In conclusion, another objective of the West that has not been achieved is the isolation of Russia, since many trading partners, especially China, major Latin American countries such as Brazil and Mexico, African states, and the BRICS in general, did not join the sanctions. Therefore, the sanctions boomeranged in the sense that while Europe was cut off from urgently needed resources, Russia was able to gradually compensate for many losses. And what's more, the process of fundamentally changing Russia's economic model that began in 2014 has accelerated over the past 2 years, with the country's growth rate in 2023 at 3.6%, with unemployment at just 2%, and with per capita income in terms of purchasing power at $27,800 per head. This is from analyst.gr. Please leave your comments, and thank you for your support. Kindly support my Patreon account. The daily posts are 5 videos daily, and they are totally different from what I have on my YouTube channel. Thank you so much for your support and that you find all my content so interesting. You'll find the Patreon account details in the description box below.